I still don't know why I chose that motel. I had stayed in plenty of cheap places while traveling for DJ gigs during university, but this one felt different even before anything happened. It sat on the edge of an old highway, with a long line of rooms facing a parking lot that looked like it hadn't been repaved in decades. I arrived late because the small house I was renting on campus had turned into a full disaster earlier that night. I had thrown a massive party because we were moving out soon and the house was scheduled to be demolished after summer. At the time, I thought that meant I could get away with anything, so I invited everyone I knew, set up the speakers, and told myself it would be the last big memory in that place. I didn't expect half the city to show up, and I definitely didn't expect a mix of university kids and bikers from two different major groups filling the rooms and hallways of the house like it was some strange street parade. I had hired a security guy, big guy, quiet, calm, because I didn't want anyone trashing the house too badly before the demolition team arrived. I didn't know back then that he was connected to the Hells Angels and the Mongols. At the time, I didn't even know much about either group, only that they were serious people, the kind you didn't cross. The party got out of hand fast. The bass shook the windows, the floors felt like they were moving, and bodies were everywhere. Then some idiot smashed a window and tried to sneak in without paying the cover. Before I even reacted, a group of bikers grabbed him, dragged him out, and tossed him into the yard like he weighed nothing. I didn't see what happened to him after that. I just saw the bikers come back inside like nothing had happened, walking through the crowd with the same calm expression they had when they arrived. No one dared to question them. They didn't start trouble, didn't push anyone, didn't act wild. They just stood in groups, drank, listened to the music, nodded their heads at the bass, and treated it like any regular night. Then the cops arrived, for cruisers rolling right onto my yard, lights flashing through the windows, sirens echoing through the neighborhood. I was outside near some of the higher-ranking bikers when it happened, and I thought for sure the party was over. I expected arrests, fines, complaints, everything. But one of the bigger guys just walked toward the officers like he already knew them. He put his arm around one of the cops, and they hugged like old friends. The cops shut off their lights, turned around, and left like nothing had even happened. The bikers didn't brag about it. They didn't push their power around. They just kept the peace in a way no one else could have that night. After the crowd finally thinned out around 3 in the morning, I felt done. Physically, mentally, everything. The house smelled like sweat, alcohol, dust, and something damp from the broken window. My head was pounding. There was glass on the floors, muddy footprints everywhere, pieces of trash already piling in corners. Even though the place was going to be demolished, I still felt a weight of responsibility pressing on me. I didn't want to sleep in that ruined house, not with the weird mix of adrenaline and exhaustion messing with my thoughts. I didn't trust myself to fall asleep there and feel safe. So I packed my bag with whatever I could grab, left the house behind, and drove until the city lights disappeared. That's how I ended up at the motel. The sign buzzed as I pulled in. A few cars were scattered around, spaced too far apart, like the guests didn't want to be near each other. The office door was still open, and a single lamp glowed inside. The manager barely looked at me, gave me a key, and pointed toward the row of rooms. The walk to my room felt longer than it really was. The parking lot lights cast long shadows on the ground, and every time the wind moved through the gaps between the buildings, it made a low whistling sound that felt like it was following me. Inside, the room was plain and quiet. Too quiet. No music, no people shouting, no footsteps or laughter or bass. Just silence pressing in from all sides. It was such a sharp difference from the noise I'd left behind that it made my skin prickle. The bed felt stiff, the carpet had stains that looked older than I was, and the air had that heavy motel smell. Cleaning chemicals mixed with something earthy and damp. I dropped my bag on the chair, locked the door, and sat on the bed. For the first time all night, the adrenaline left me, and my body finally realized how exhausted it was. I lay back on the scratchy blanket, closed my eyes, and let the silence sink in. About an hour later, I woke up to a sound I couldn't place at first. A heavy thud, soft but controlled, like someone pressing their weight against the door. Then another, not knocking, more like testing. Someone shifting their body, leaning in. Then I heard slow steps outside the window. The gravel crunched under heavy boots. The sound moved past my room, paused, then came back toward the door. My heart started racing, and I sat up, trying to stay quiet. After everything that had happened earlier that night, the last thing I wanted was another confrontation. I remembered the row of motorcycles outside the party house and the bikers standing guard, making the whole place feel less dangerous even when the police arrived. Here, though, I was alone. No loud music, no crowd, no people I knew. Just thin motel walls and an empty parking lot. The footsteps moved again, slower this time. I could hear breathing, not loud but steady. Someone was standing right outside my door. My pulse was so strong it filled my ears. I leaned forward and tried to identify the sound. It wasn't like the drunk students from earlier. It wasn't hurried or sloppy. It was calm and deliberate, the same kind of steps I heard from the bikers when they walked through my house, heavy, solid, confident. I thought about the party, about the guy who broke the window and got dragged out. I hadn't seen where he went. Maybe he followed people. Maybe he saw which way I drove. Maybe he thought I owed him something. I didn't know. The mind jumps to strange places when you're alone in a dark motel room far from home. The footsteps eventually drifted away, but I didn't relax. Not fully. I sat on the bed with my back against the wall and listened for a long time. Every sound became suspicious. The creak of the building settling, cars passing on the highway, someone talking faintly in another room, the wind brushing dirt across the parking lot. After a while, the night quieted again. The footsteps never came back, and no one tried the door. But the fear stayed with me the rest of the night. The silence didn't feel peaceful. It felt like someone was waiting, or watching, or walking just far enough away that I couldn't hear them. Being alone in a place that wasn't mine, after a night full of unpredictable people, made everything feel sharper and more fragile. I finally slept a little just before dawn. When I stepped outside in the morning, the parking lot looked normal again. Couple of trucks, a few old sedans, nothing strange. The gravel showed no signs of footprints, even though I knew what I heard. The air was warm, and the motel office still smelled like stale coffee. No one looked at me. No one said anything. Everything acted like the night had been empty and calm. But the fear stayed with me, not because anything supernatural happened, and not because someone tried to break in. It was something deeper, the realization of how quickly control can disappear, how fast safety can turn into danger, and how alone you really are when the noise and crowds are gone. The party earlier had felt chaotic, but there had been order in it. The bikers kept people in line. They stopped trouble before it spread. They didn't start fights, but they finished them before anyone else even tried. As wild as that night was, I never felt as vulnerable there as I felt in that motel room. It taught me something real. People can look dangerous and still be the ones keeping you safe. And a quiet place, a cheap room, a still hallway, those can be the places that make you feel the most exposed. I left the motel, drove back to campus, and finished moving out of the house before demolition day. The party became a story people repeated for months, but the motel night stayed with me longer. It was a reminder that when everything goes quiet, the fear you carry settles in deeper, and the world feels bigger and darker than it did before. Even now, whenever I drive past old motels on empty highways, I feel a little tension in my chest. I remember that silent room, the heavy footsteps, the feeling of being watched through the thin door, and the understanding that safety is fragile, unpredictable, and sometimes dependent on the very people you'd never expect. That night didn't end with drama or action. It just ended with me walking away in the morning light, tired and shaken, knowing I never wanted to be in a place like that again. And that alone was enough to leave a mark. I checked into the motel because I had no other choice. I had been driving for hours through a stretch of highway that felt abandoned, with no towns, no rest stops, nothing but dead fields and long shadows. My eyes were burning from the road, and my head felt heavy. When I saw the old broken sign that said, Rest Haven Motel, flickering in the dark, I knew I had to stop, even though something about the place felt wrong the moment I turned into the lot. The parking lot was almost empty. Only 2 cars were parked near the far end, both covered in a layer of dust that made them look like they hadn't moved in days. The building itself had peeling paint, cracked windows, and a long walkway with rusted metal rails. The air smelled like old water and hot asphalt. I felt uneasy before I even grabbed my bag from the car, but I kept telling myself I only needed the room for one night. Just sleep, wake up, and leave. Inside the room, the air was thick and stale. It smelled like damp carpet and cheap cleaning spray that failed to hide something sour underneath. The carpet had dark stains scattered across it, and the bedspread looked wrinkled and faded as if it hadn't been washed properly in a long time. The air conditioner rattled weakly from the corner, blowing air that didn't feel cold at all. I could hear a faint tapping in the walls, like pipes clicking or old wood shifting. I put my bag on the chair and tried to settle in. I always tried to check the room before I relaxed, just to feel safe. I noticed right away that the lock on the door was loose. It wiggled when I pushed it. I tested it a few times and realized someone had probably forced the door open before. The metal plate around the lock was bent and scratched. I didn't like that, but there was nothing I could do. There was no other motel around for another hour or more of driving, and I was too tired to keep going. I walked into the bathroom, and the floor tiles were cracked and uneven. A thin line of brown water was dripping from the pipe under the sink, forming a small puddle. The mirror above the sink was foggy and had fingerprints smudged across it. I turned on the shower just to test it, but the water barely ran, just a weak stream that smelled like metal. I turned it off and decided I'd skip the shower. I just wanted to lie down. When I sat on the bed, the mattress sagged under my weight. It felt lumpy and soft in all the wrong places. I lay back anyway, trying to calm down. I stared at the ceiling and noticed a dark patch spreading across a corner, almost like mold. The room was too quiet, but not in a peaceful way. It was the kind of quiet that made every tiny sound stand out. I could hear footsteps outside, slow and heavy, moving along the walkway. They didn't stop near my door, but they moved slowly enough that I could track exactly where the person was walking. Then the footsteps faded, leaving me alone with that faint tapping inside the walls again. I tried to distract myself by scrolling through my phone, but the signal was weak. The Wi-Fi didn't work either. The only thing I could do was stare at my screen showing a loading symbol that never finished. My frustration made the room feel smaller. I decided to get some sleep. I turned off the lamp, but as soon as the room went dark, the uneasiness grew stronger. I could see the faint outline of the door through the streetlight coming through the curtains. I closed my eyes and tried to relax, but my mind kept replaying the loose lock, the dusty cars outside, and the quiet footsteps. I must have fallen asleep lightly, because every little noise woke me up. At one point, I heard a soft scraping sound right outside my door. It didn't sound like footsteps this time. It sounded like someone dragging something along the ground, slowly and carefully. My heart started pounding. I stared at the door from the bed, barely breathing, just listening. The sound grew louder for a moment, then it stopped. After a long pause, I heard a faint thud, like something being put down or dropped. Then silence. I waited for a long time before I could even move. My neck felt stiff from lying tense. The room was dark, and the air felt heavier now, almost warm. I listened for anything else, but nothing came. After what felt like an hour, I finally drifted back into a restless sleep. Sometime later, I woke up again, this time to a different sound. A soft clicking noise coming from the door, like metal shifting. My eyes snapped open. The lock was moving, not wildly, but in a slow, careful way. I couldn't see it directly from where I was on the bed, but I could hear the metal softly scraping. My mouth went dry instantly. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just stared into the dark. The clicking stopped. Then I heard the tiniest creak, like the door moving just a fraction. I knew then that someone was trying to see if they could push it open. I felt cold sweat on my back. The door didn't open fully. The chain latch I had added from the inside held it in place, but whoever was out there pushed just enough to test it. After a few tense seconds, the pressure stopped. Then I heard slow footsteps moving away again. Not rushed, not panicked, almost patient. I lay awake for the rest of the night. I couldn't even close my eyes. I kept waiting for the footsteps to come back, for the lock to move again, for the door to creak. My mind raced with possibilities. Maybe it was someone drunk. Maybe it was someone checking which rooms were empty. Maybe it was someone who liked targeting travelers too tired to fight back. No matter what I told myself, I couldn't shake the fear that someone had stood just inches from me, separated only by a thin wooden door and a loose lock. When the sky finally started to lighten, I got up immediately. My body felt weak from the lack of sleep, but adrenaline pushed me. I packed my things fast and checked the peephole before touching the door. The walkway outside was empty. I unlatched the chain, but I kept my hand on the door for a moment, listening. Nothing. I opened the door slowly. The air outside felt cold and open, but I noticed something right away. On the ground, just a few inches from my door, was a long scrape mark on the concrete, like someone had dragged something heavy across it during the night. It wasn't there when I checked in. The mark led down the walkway and then curved around the corner, out of sight. My stomach dropped when I noticed that the scrape ended with a dark smear that looked almost like old grease or maybe dried mud. Something thick enough that it stuck to the ground in a way that didn't match the rest of the walkway. I didn't want to follow it. I didn't want to know what had made it. I grabbed my bag tighter and walked straight to my car. As I passed the two dusty cars, I looked at them closely for the first time. One of them had all its windows fogged from the inside, leaving hand-shaped marks stuck in the glass. The other had a blanket in the back seat that looked like someone had been sleeping there recently. I felt a cold rush run through me. I got into my car, locked the doors right away, and started the engine. As I backed out, I caught one last look at the walkway in my rearview mirror. I didn't see anyone, but I felt like someone was watching from one of the dark windows. I didn't wait to find out. I drove straight out of the lot and didn't slow down until I was miles away. Only when the motel sign disappeared completely behind me did the tight feeling in my chest start to ease. I kept thinking about the loose lock, the quiet scraping, the slow pressure on the door. Whoever tried to get in wasn't desperate. They were patient, too patient. The ending is simple but clear. I never went back to a roadside motel again. I made a rule for myself that day. If a place gives me a bad feeling, I leave no matter how tired I am, because that night taught me something I won't ever forget. Sometimes the scariest thing isn't what you imagine in the dark. It's the real person standing on the other side of a thin wooden door, waiting in silence, hoping you're asleep, and knowing they might try again for someone else. I still think about that night in the London hostel, even though it's been weeks and I keep telling myself it was just one bad incident. I've stayed in hostels all around Europe without a single problem, even when I was alone, even in cities much rougher than London. But something about that night still leaves a heavy feeling in my chest, like a knot I can't undo no matter how much time passes. There were 3 of us traveling together, 2 friends who were both male, and me. We booked a 9-bed mixed dorm because we were trying to save money, and we figured it would be like every other cheap place we'd stayed. A little noisy, a little messy, but harmless. The room had 3 sets of triple-tier bunk beds lined up along the walls. I had the bottom bed on the right side, one friend was on the very top bunk above me, and the other friend had the bottom bed of the middle triple stack. By the time we got back to the hostel that night, it was around 2 in the morning. We tried to be quiet because almost everyone in the room was already asleep. The only light came from the hallway and a tiny glow from the bathroom inside the room. The air felt heavy with that mixture of warm breath, old mattresses, and too many people packed into one space. I climbed into my bed and settled onto my side, facing the wall, trying to slow my breathing and calm down from the long night out. For a few minutes, I just lay there listening to the usual sounds. Someone shifting in their bed, the creak of a bunk frame, the faint drip from a sink pipe in the bathroom. At first, I didn't think anything about the rustling noise behind me. It sounded like someone going through their bag, which was normal, especially if they'd just gotten back late. I tried to ignore it. Then I felt a hand on my hip, right through the blanket. My whole body went stiff. It was such a specific touch, firm enough to feel the pressure, slow enough that it didn't feel like an accident. My heart jumped so fast it felt like it tripped over itself. I rolled onto my back and looked over my shoulder, half expecting it to be one of my friends messing around, but instead I saw a stranger. Some random guy I had never seen before, leaning over my bed, reaching for the blanket again, like he was trying to pull it away and make space for himself. For a second, my mind didn't fully process it. My first thought was that maybe he was drunk and confused about which bed was his. I'd seen that happen before in hostels, people stumbling into the wrong bunk after a long night. It wasn't pleasant, but usually it was harmless. He backed away and went to the bottom bed on the left side of the room, and I thought maybe that was the end of it. Just a stupid mix-up. But I was shaking. My hands, my chest, everything felt tight and wired, like my body already knew something was wrong even though my mind was still trying to rationalize it. A minute passed, maybe two, long enough that I started trying to settle myself again. Long enough that I convinced myself it was over. Then I heard the rustling again. The same sound, slow and deliberate. Before I could even fully turn, I felt weight shift near my feet. The guy was back. He crouched low, moving toward the side of my bed again. The air felt different around me. Heavier, colder, sharper. This time, everything in my body reacted at once, like every muscle tensed in pure instinct. I wanted to scream, but something held it down. Maybe fear of waking the whole room, maybe the shock of not understanding what I was seeing. He backed away again, slow and clumsy, like he didn't even care that he was being obvious. I started shaking harder. I grabbed my phone and messaged my friend on the top bunk above me. I told him I didn't feel safe. At first he thought I meant snoring or someone being loud, because both my friends were wearing earplugs that night. When he realized what I meant, what was actually happening, he shifted above me, trying to watch the room from the higher angle without drawing attention to himself. The guy disappeared into the bathroom. I could see from the light under the door that he left it wide open. I refused to look, but later my friend told me the guy had been walking around with his pants around his thighs, not pulled up properly, like he wanted someone to notice him. Every part of me felt sick just imagining it. He went back to his bed after that, and for a few minutes the room felt calm again. Not comfortable, not safe, but quiet. The kind of quiet that makes your stomach tense because you can tell it won't last. My friend kept watching from above, staying alert. Then the guy moved again. Even the air around me felt different. He wasn't walking this time. The sound was too soft, too low to the ground. My friend saw him first. He watched the guy crawling across the floor, slowly, almost methodically, moving toward my bed again like he was trying to stay out of sight. Something inside me dropped like a weight falling into cold water. Before the guy could reach me, my friend shone his phone flashlight down at the floor. The light hit the guy directly, catching his movements. For a second, the guy froze like an animal caught somewhere it didn't belong. Then he twisted his face in some strange, offended way, like the light itself had assaulted him, and he suddenly launched himself upwards. He climbed that triple bunk like he had claws. Fast, sloppy, wild. He wasn't acting drunk. He wasn't acting confused. He was acting like someone who wasn't thinking normally at all. He reached for my friend's phone, grabbing and pulling at the mattress frame. They struggled, kicking, pushing, trying to keep balance on a structure not meant for that kind of fight. My friend kicked him hard in the neck. Hard enough that anyone sober or even normally drunk would have backed off. But this guy fell backward, hit the floor, and came straight back again like nothing even touched him. That was the moment I truly felt fear in my bones. Not just shock, not just anxiety. Fear, raw and cold and solid. I ran. I didn't think. I didn't look. I ran straight out of the room, down the hall to the front lobby, and got security as fast as I could. My legs felt weak under me, like they weren't connected properly to my body, but I didn't stop moving. Security came back with me, and when they opened the door, the guy was still there, still clinging to the bunk frame, like the whole world around him wasn't reacting the way he expected. They pulled him down and restrained him. They called the police. He tried to blame my friend, babbling in broken English, pointing at him, acting like he was the victim. The police arrived in a riot van. When they dragged him outside, he slammed his forehead into the brick wall repeatedly without even flinching. It was like he wasn't even in his own body. They took him away, banned him from the building, and finally the room was quiet again. Too quiet. The kind that keeps your nerves buzzing. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. My friend above me didn't either. The other friend, the one in the middle bunk, somehow slept through everything and woke up in the morning saying London people seemed very friendly. By the time the sun rose, I felt like parts of me had been drained and replaced with something heavy. Not trauma exactly, but a deep, lingering awareness. A new understanding that when you sleep in a room full of strangers, you never really know who is 5 feet away from you in the dark. The ending is simple. I never stayed in another hostel on that trip. I didn't swear them off forever. I know this was a rare incident, something far outside my usual experiences. But that night taught me something I'll never forget. In a mixed dorm, in a cheap room, in a place full of strangers passing through, danger doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it crawls quietly across the floor in the dark. And even after the police take it away, the feeling stays with you. I checked into that motel on a Thursday night, already tired from hours of driving and wanting nothing more than to fall asleep. It wasn't even my first choice. The place I usually stayed at was booked, and this one sat right off the highway with a faded sign and a parking lot that looked uneven, cracked like dried mud. I told myself it was only for one night, just long enough to get some rest and start fresh in the morning. The lobby smelled like old air conditioning and cheap cleaning spray. The guy at the front desk barely looked up when I walked in. He slid a laminated form across the counter, pushed a keycard toward me, and went back to whatever he was watching on a tiny TV behind the desk. I didn't think much of it. Motels like this never had friendly staff. You got a room, you slept, you left. My room was at the far corner, down a long hall where the lights buzzed like tired insects. The carpet looked worn, flattened in the center like thousands of shoes had dragged the same slow path over and over. When I unlocked the door, the room hit me with that smell old motels always had. Stale air trapped with old carpet, old curtains, and old memories. It wasn't terrible, though, just basic. A bed with a sagging mattress, a small table, an old tube TV bolted to the dresser, and a bathroom with weak-looking towels. I dropped my bag on the chair, took a shower, changed into clean clothes, and sat on the edge of the bed for a moment, rubbing my eyes. I kept thinking about the long drive back the next day, the early morning traffic, the meetings I still had to prepare for. And then I remembered that post I'd read online a few weeks earlier about checking motel rooms for hidden cameras. I'm not paranoid by nature, but that post stuck with me. It explained how easy it was for someone to hide a tiny camera in a clock, a vent, a hole in the wall, even inside a small screw head. The steps were simple. Close all the curtains, turn off the lights, make the room completely dark, then turn on your phone camera and scan around the room. If a red dot appeared on the screen, it could be a hidden camera lens reflecting back. First, I brushed it off. I didn't want to do it. I didn't want to be that kind of person. But the thought stuck there quietly in the back of my head, like someone tapping a finger on my shoulder every few seconds. And the longer I sat there, the stronger that tapping felt. Finally, I thought, it'll take 1 minute. Just check. Then you can sleep. So I got up, went to the window, and pulled the curtains all the way shut. I clicked off the lamps and let the room fall into total darkness. The hum of the air conditioner filled the space, low and steady. I pulled out my phone and opened the camera, waiting for my eyes to adjust to the dark. When I lifted the screen and began slowly turning in a circle, I felt silly for even doing it. The dresser, nothing. The mirror above it, nothing. The TV, nothing. The headboard, nothing. I was already planning to turn the lights back on and call myself paranoid when I swept the camera across the corner near the ceiling. A red dot blinked once on my screen. I froze. I tilted the phone slightly left, then right. The dot vanished, then reappeared again when I angled it just right. My stomach dropped hard, like I'd missed a step on a staircase. I slowly lowered the phone and looked at the corner with my naked eye. Just darkness. Nothing unusual. But on the camera, that tiny red dot kept shining back at me. I didn't want to jump to conclusions. I forced myself to stay calm. Maybe it was some weird reflection. Maybe it was a smoke detector or something, even though I knew smoke detectors didn't usually glow red unless there was power or an issue. And even then, they weren't hidden in the ceiling corner like that. I zoomed in with the camera. The dot stayed sharp and steady. My heart felt like it was climbing into my throat. I stepped closer. The air conditioner rumbled behind me, blowing cold air on my legs. I looked up directly at the corner. Still nothing visible to my eyes. But when I held the phone up again, the camera picked up a tiny red pinprick of light in the wall, right where the wallpaper pattern looked slightly off, like the texture dipped in a small, smooth circle. A lens. A camera lens. The room felt suddenly smaller, like the ceiling was pressing down. It made my skin crawl to think someone might be watching me right at that moment, or had been watching people for who knows how long. My first instinct was to get out, just walk straight to the hallway and not come back. But that meant passing the lobby again, passing the front desk guy. If he was involved, and I knew that was a real possibility, then leaving the room suddenly looking rattled might tip him off. I didn't know if there were more cameras. I didn't know how many rooms had them. And the worst part was the door felt like the most vulnerable place in the room. If someone wanted to trap someone, that's where they'd wait. I stood still for a long moment, my heart pounding, trying to think clearly. I wasn't going to confront anyone. I wasn't going to demand answers. I just needed to get out safely. So I forced myself to act like nothing was wrong. I turned the lights back on, grabbed my bag calmly, and zipped it up slowly. My hands started shaking halfway through, and I had to stop for a second, pretending to adjust my clothes just to get myself under control. I checked the room once more to make sure I wasn't leaving anything behind, even though all I wanted was to leave immediately. When I stepped into the hallway, the air outside felt warmer, heavier. A single buzzing light overhead flickered once as I walked past it. I tried to keep my footsteps steady. Halfway down the hallway, I heard something behind me. Maybe a door hinge, maybe a footstep. I didn't turn around. I just kept walking, kept breathing, kept moving. When I reached the lobby, the front desk guy finally looked up at me, really looked at me this time. His face was blank, but his eyes felt too alert, like he already knew I wasn't staying the night after all. I kept my head down and walked straight outside without saying a word. The cool night air hit me like a shock, and only then did I feel how hard my chest had been tightening. I got into my car, locked the doors instantly, and just sat there gripping the wheel until my hands stopped shaking enough to drive. I didn't go back inside. I didn't ask for a refund. I didn't tell the guy anything. I didn't call out the hidden camera. I just drove straight to another hotel 20 minutes away and checked in there. I slept lightly, feeling watched even though I knew I wasn't. The next morning, when I had daylight and distance and a clear head, I called the police in that area. I told them what I saw. I gave them the motel name and room number. They said they'd send someone to check it out. I don't know what happened after that. I never followed up. Part of me didn't want to know. Part of me figured it wasn't the first time, and it wouldn't be the last. But I learned something that night. Something that still makes my stomach twist whenever I check into a cheap motel. Hidden cameras don't look like cameras. They don't make noises. They don't flash. They sit perfectly still in the quiet dark, waiting for the one person who notices the tiny red dot when no one else ever bothered to look. And now, every time I stay anywhere, motel, hotel, rental, I always turn off the lights, pull out my phone and scan the room. Because once you see that red dot even one time, you never forget it. I still remember the feeling of that room in Beijing, even though it has been decades. The year was 1996, and back then I was traveling more than I spent time at home. I had been moving through different cities for work, drifting between airports, taxis, and hotel rooms that all blended together after a while. When I arrived at that particular hotel, I didn't think much about it. It was one of those tall buildings wrapped in glass and concrete, with a lobby that smelled like polished floors, old carpet, and something faintly floral. The staff worked fast, and the whole place had a quiet, controlled atmosphere. Nothing felt dangerous. Nothing felt strange. My room was on one of the higher floors, maybe the 12th or 13th. The hallway was long and narrow, lined with identical doors and soft lights that never seemed to change. When I opened the door, the room looked like any other hotel room. 2 beds, a desk, a heavy curtain hanging from a metal rod across the window. The bathroom smelled faintly of bleach, and the towels felt stiff like they had been dried too long. It wasn't fancy, but it was clean enough, and after hours on airplanes and in crowded airports, that was all I wanted. I went through my usual travel routine. I unpacked a few things, set my toiletries by the sink, checked the lock on the door twice, and tossed myself onto the bed just to feel something soft under me. I remember the quiet more than anything. A thick, heavy quiet that came from being high above the street, where traffic noise turned into a distant hum. The air conditioning made a low buzzing sound, steady and rhythmic. After a while, I felt sticky from the travel sweat and decided to take a shower before going to sleep. The water pressure was strong, and the water came out almost too hot at first, but it felt good to wash the day off me. I stayed under the stream longer than usual, feeling the heat soak into my shoulders. When I stepped out, the mirror was fogged over completely, and the air in the bathroom felt warm and full of steam. I carried the towel with me back into the room, but I didn't bother putting it on. I always preferred to air dry after a hot shower, especially after long travel days. The sheets on the bed were cool from the air conditioning, and I lay down on top of them, stretching out, letting the air settle over my skin. The curtain was fully drawn across the window, so the room felt dim and private, the kind of privacy that only hotel rooms can create. Temporary, thin, but comforting when you're tired. I must have been lying there for only a couple of minutes when the phone suddenly rang. The sound startled me. It was sharp, mechanical, and loud in the quiet room. I sat up fast, my heart jumping in my chest. Back then, hotel phones didn't ring softly, and the sudden noise cut through everything. I grabbed the receiver mostly to stop the sound. I expected maybe the front desk had the wrong room or something simple. Instead, what I heard froze me in place. It was a blunt instruction telling me to put on clothes. No explanation, no pause, just that. For a moment, I didn't even process it. I sat there naked on the bed, holding the receiver, staring at nothing. My skin suddenly felt cold, my chest tight. I felt exposed even though the curtains were drawn. I looked around the room like there was someone hiding in the corner. I checked the window even though I knew it couldn't be opened more than a few inches. I felt like the walls were watching me. The first thought that hit me was that someone had seen me. Not guessed, not assumed, seen. The timing was too perfect. I had only just gotten out of the shower. I was on the bed, drying off, alone. There was no reason anyone should know that. There was no way they should have known that. I got up fast and grabbed my clothes from the chair, my hands shaking a little as I pulled them on. The room felt different now. Not private, not safe. I kept glancing toward the curtains, half expecting them to ripple or shift. I felt like I had walked into a trap I didn't know existed. I checked the peephole on the door and saw nothing. The hallway was empty and still. I opened the closet even though I knew it was too small for anyone to hide in. I checked behind the shower curtain again even though I had just been in there. My brain didn't calm down, not even when I had fully dressed and stood in the middle of the room trying to breathe normally. The idea that someone had watched me in that moment, that someone had access to the room or cameras or some unseen angle, made every inch of my skin crawl. It didn't feel like a joke or a misunderstanding. It felt intentional, direct, and carefully timed. I walked slowly back to the window, keeping a few feet of distance. The curtains were thick and heavy, the kind meant to block sunlight. I touched the fabric and felt the weight of it, but I didn't pull it back at first. I was afraid of what I might see. I imagined someone standing on a balcony that didn't exist. I imagined a camera lens hidden behind the glass. I imagined a shape in the reflection. Finally, I slid the curtain open an inch, just enough to look. Outside was only the city. Rows of buildings, lights, neon signs glowing in the night. Nothing unusual. No balconies facing my room. No ledges where someone could stand. No angles that made sense for anyone to see me. But the feeling didn't go away. I closed the curtain again, slowly and carefully, like I was afraid of making noise. I checked the smoke detector next. I stood on the chair and looked at it closely, searching for anything out of place. It looked normal. Yellowed plastic, dust around the edges. Nothing strange, but I didn't feel convinced. I checked the vents. I checked behind the desk. I checked the TV even though it was too big for a hidden camera. Every corner seemed suspicious. When I finally sat down again, fully dressed, I realized my heart was still beating fast. My hands were still slightly shaky. The phone sat on the desk, quiet now, but the memory of that sudden instruction burned in my mind. The room didn't feel like a room anymore. It felt like a place someone else had access to, someone I couldn't see. I didn't want to call the front desk. I didn't want to leave my room and walk through the hallways where anyone could watch me. I didn't want to switch rooms and risk someone seeing me again. I felt stuck in a place that no longer belonged to me, trapped between staying and leaving. I spent the rest of the night fully clothed, sitting upright in the bed, listening to every small sound around me. The hum of the air conditioning, the elevator dinging far down the hallway, footsteps on the carpet outside my door, people talking quietly as they passed. Each sound made my nerves tighten, like I was waiting for something else to happen. Nothing did, but that somehow felt worse, because it meant whoever made that call had no reason to do anything else. They had already gotten the reaction they wanted. In the morning, I left the room as soon as the sun came up. I didn't look back at the bed or the curtains. I didn't check out at the front desk. I just left the key in the room and walked out of the hotel. The lobby looked normal, the staff calm, other guests moving around like they had slept peacefully. I felt like the only person carrying a secret no one else could see. When I got outside, the air felt different, fresher, less heavy, but I still felt unsettled, like something had passed too close to me without touching. I kept replaying the moment in my mind, the phone ringing, the voice giving that instruction, the shock that went through my chest. It stayed with me long after I left Beijing. I never figured out who made the call. I never learned how they knew what I was doing in that moment. The building didn't have balconies or open views. The curtains had been fully drawn. There were no obvious cameras, nothing strange in the vents, no gaps in the walls. Maybe the hotel had surveillance I didn't know about. Maybe someone on the staff had access to something they weren't supposed to. Or maybe the room had been used for something before I ever walked into it. The truth is, I'll never know. But that moment taught me something real and unsettling. Sometimes the most frightening experiences are the ones where nothing dramatic happens at all. Just a small glimpse that someone you can't see is watching you when you're at your most exposed. And that kind of fear stays with you long after the trip ends.